Firebase is kind of an amazing tool that when you start using it, it gives you basically everything you need out of the box. The problem that we really wanted to solve was later on when you start scaling. We know that databases are sort of this unsolved problem for a lot of engineers. People know about migrations, but they don't know what's the canonical best way to do it. So we basically want to solve all these lower level problems, and we'll solve them for people who aren't so experienced with databases in particular.
Hey, this is Brian, and you're listening to JAMstack Radio, a bi-weekly series where we discuss the JAMstack, a new way of building websites and apps that are fast, secure, and simple to work with. JAMstack Radio is brought to you by Heavybit, a program dedicated to helping startups take their developer products to market. For more information, visit heavybit.com. If you're interested in being a guest on the show, or if you'd like to suggest a topic, find us on Twitter at JAMstack Radio. Welcome to another installment of JAMstack Radio. On the line, we've got Paul Copplestone, aka Copple, coming in from Singapore. Copple, how you doing?
Hey, B-Dougie, I'm doing good, thanks.
Excellent. So we've chatted a couple times, and I invited you on the podcast because you've never been on the podcast before, and you just launched a really cool new version of the thing you're working on. So do you want to intro yourself and tell us why you're here?
Sure. Yeah, so I'm the CEO of Supabase, and Supabase is an open source Firebase alternative. So basically, we're building the features of Firebase, but we're using open source tools.
Excellent. So why Firebase? Do you have like a love for just the structure of the platform? I mean, I'm a big fan of Firebase, and I think most people, if you probably heard the first 20 episodes, which you can find them on Heavybit's website, I think someone actually reached out to me asking where the first 20 episodes were. You know, I've used Firebase for a lot of different projects, so I'm excited, but I'm curious, why build another Firebase?
Yeah, that's for good reason, right? I mean, Firebase is kind of an amazing tool that when you start using it, it gives you basically everything you need out of the box. Yeah, really a great tool for especially building, prototyping very early on, getting started. The problem that we really wanted to solve, or I personally wanted to solve, was later on when you start scaling. So the origin story of Supabase is that we were using Firebase in my previous startup, and we hit some scaling problems, and we had to switch to our Postgres database. And in that process, I wrote a real-time engine on top of Postgres, and that was to implement a chat feature inside our startup. Then I open-sourced that real-time engine, and from there, things kind of evolved. We ended up building a few more features, and then we decided at the start of 2020 that we'd make a proper business, my co-founder and I. And we sort of adopted the tagline and adopted the target to build this open source version of Firebase, but with the key feature that it's as easy to use at the start, but you can scale it indefinitely. So that means we've made a bunch of decisions around the technologies that we use to make sure that they're sort of enterprise grade, they're very robust, very scalable, and making sure that even if you start something and you build it in a weekend, it can just scale to millions of users.
Yeah, and that's super enticing too as well. And I'm curious to briefly touch on the scalability issues that you had with your startup as well, because like I'm familiar with Firebase. I've been using it since the start and end of me doing mobile development, because I don't do any more mobile development. But yeah, it's been like at least 5 years since I first did my first Firebase app. But I never got to the point where I hit a scaling issue. I think I just sort of fell off to stop shipping code to a project that was not going anywhere. So like, what was the sort of the limit of that, and sort of how is Supabase solving that scaling, if we want to get in more detail?
Yeah, sure. Actually, we chatted to a lot of developers at the start of last year, and that means different things to different people, scalability issues. For me in particular, in my startup, we hit one very peculiar bug where you can query one document per second. Basically, you can query in Cloud Store a document, one query per second. And does that make sense?
Yeah.
And the way we had structured our data was that we're dumping everything into a document and using that for the real-time streams. And of course, people are sending chat messages more than once per second. So there was a little bit of a lag between when you were sending messages. But scalability for other people is different things. You can actually have limits of throughput. Maybe some people are hitting limits around, maybe they're getting 3,000 reads per second or 1,000 writes per second. There could be limits around scaling their code base because it's a NoSQL store. They find that their schema starts living inside their database. It's hard to build relationships between the documents. It could be limits around just missing functionality. For example, doing counts rather than querying all your documents, counting how many of a particular type of document there are is a limit. So it's all sorts of limits that we're aware of, and we just want to mitigate them from the very start. And so the way we've done that actually is by choosing different technology. So we're a Firebase replacement in spirit, but not in compatibility. So we don't use a NoSQL store. We actually use Postgres, one of the sort of most trusted and scalable databases, an open source database that there is on the market. And we basically choose tools for each of the features that we know can hit scale. We do performance tests on them. We make sure that they're easy to use, like Firebase, and that they can scale up to basically enterprise grade.
Excellent. Yeah, I mean, I've been using Postgres databases since the beginning of my career as a developer. So I understand the tooling pretty well because I've just had to use it in my day job. And I think the excitement of the NoSQL space is that everything was new, but it doesn't come with a lot of that sort of existing experience in the tooling. So I definitely understand the reasoning for that as well. So yeah, I'm interested in kind of battle testing it with some projects that I have coming up in the next couple months. So more on that in the future, folks. Definitely, if you aren't subscribing to this podcast, subscribe to the podcast, and you'll hear more about that in future podcasts. But I'm curious about the story. You had mentioned your co-founder. Did he also come from that same startup, or did you know each other from other places?
No, we actually knew each other from about 3 or 4 years ago. We both moved to Singapore for a program called Entrepreneur First, which is this accelerator where they throw a bunch of people in a room, 100 people in a room together, and you basically know nobody, and you have to form a company together, usually a deep tech company. So we spent 3 months on this accelerator. We got to know each other there. We didn't do a company together, but we ended up living together for a year. And when I decided that I wanted to do Supabase, I kind of sat him down at a cafe one day and I pitched him the idea. He decided to join. And yeah, that's the origin.
Wow, that's excellent. And speaking of origin, like you're now in Singapore today too as well. So are you just in love with the country, or like what's the allure of Singapore today?
Yeah. So I've been in Southeast Asia for, I think, 6 years now. I actually moved over to Kuala Lumpur for my first startup and then moved to Singapore for that program. I mean, it's a great place to live. It's very easy, very convenient, but our company is fully remote. So it doesn't matter where people live. We've got people in Peru, the US, Canada, in Europe. You can really be anywhere. I actually just got back from France. I was working there during Christmas. So yeah, our team's really spread out. And so we're not really headquartered in Singapore, but for me, I quite like it. The weather's great. The tech scene's quite good, and it's quite cheap and convenient to live in.
Excellent. Yeah. I mean, for the context of folks listening, if you listen to this down the road, we are at the beginning of 2021. So you spent your entire year working on Supabase, which when I first heard of it, it was an alpha, and it was sort of just, people were sort of just getting excited about it. I actually heard it from Thor, a contact and friend that we know.
Yeah.
And that was my first introduction to Supabase. And from there, I was hooked at the sort of open source Firebase piece of it.
It's funny, actually. So Thor works at Stripe. He's a developer advocate. And one of his colleagues is my COO of my first startup. So that's how we knew each other. And I actually was in Stripe just chatting to this guy, John, about what we're doing, getting ideas, and he invited Thor over. And at the time, we kind of hadn't adopted the idea of open source Firebase. It was just Postgres, making it very easy to use. Then we started building, and we did a launch on Hacker News about April when we got into Y Combinator. And after that, I was meeting John again for coffee. And that's where I actually showed Thor a demo of what we're building. And it was this, one-click deploy of a Slack clone where you can get a real-time chat app up and running just by sort of clicking a button and deploy it out. And from that moment on, yeah, he's been amazing. Thor has been just promoting us and building on top of Supabase, helping us out with a bunch of our open source libraries. So yeah, it's been great.
Yeah. And Thor and I partnered with a event that we had towards the end of the year, close to the GitHub universe, which was the Flossing Code hackathon. It was a thing we did. I've done previously for our ERG, the Black the Cats at GitHub, focused around teaching open source to underrepresented folks in tech. So competent engineers is not doing open source. And Thor helped involve Stripe and Supabase, and Vercel also invited Vercel to come and help too as well. And we have this one-click deployment for a Stripe integration that's powered by Supabase and doing authentication and all those wonderful bells and whistles too as well, which was pretty timely because you just announced your beta within weeks of that event as well. So I mentioned I learned of it in the alpha. Do you want to talk about what the difference between now that you're in beta, like what features we have for Supabase?
Yeah, so right now the features of Supabase are basically the database, which is a Postgres database. We've got auth baked in, so we use actually Netlify's GoTrue server, which
Nice.
I know you're very familiar with.
Yes.
For authentication. And then we use for authorization Postgres' row-level security. And we wrap all of this with client libraries and an interface that's very easy to use. It's kind of got a table interface, quite similar to Airtable, built on top of Postgres. And then we use a tool called PostgreSQL. In fact, we employ one of the maintainers of Postgres, and that builds instant APIs on top of your Postgres database. So you focus on building your schema, and then you do nothing for the API. It just automatically works out of the box. As you add a table or as you add a column, the API self-updates, and the documentation inside your dashboard updates as well.
Yeah, that is amazing too as well. And a couple weeks ago, I started working on this project, and we talked about it off before we hit start on the podcast. But I'm building a sort of database to help with open source contributors find open source contributions and projects. So I basically started a Supabase database on stream and didn't really get too far. I got the database working, but then I was sort of reading documentation and chatting. It was one of my first streams back. It was post a holiday, so I was sort of really distracted. I'm looking forward to get back to actually shipping that. But what I'm getting at is the ease of me just getting started. It's very familiar in sort of the Firebase experience where I can just sort of start typing records and create tables and relationships between the two. And then what's great about it is the API is actually pulling that data inside of my React app, which I'm a big React fan, and similar to all the SDKs for Firebase. So yeah, I really appreciate just having that sort of like out of the box experience. And I didn't know about the API thing of actually building APIs on top of the database because I didn't get that far for obvious reasons.
Yeah, I mean, the beauty of what we're offering is that if you want, you actually can do a full serverless setup. I know this is particularly targeted at JAMstack, so you actually don't need any middleware. If you use row-level security, then you can query directly into the Postgres database, and it'll use the JWT to authenticate and then to verify that the user has access. So you can write these policies directly inside our dashboard to authorize whether a user can access certain rows or not. And these are full SQL queries, so they can be very powerful. I've seen people build social networks with just these policies. So yeah, they can really be quite powerful. And it's worth noting that the database that we offer when you spin up a project is a full Postgres database. It's not a schema within a database. It's literally a full database. So you can connect in, you can use database migration scripts, anything that you want, and connect into your database directly. You don't have to use our dashboard, but that's the aim, that we start you off, as you say, very easily within the dashboard, and then we'll offer some tooling later on around working on your local machine.
So I'm curious about the tooling too as well. Like I know tools like Prisma 2 being out for over a year now at this point. The Supabase, do they integrate with things like Prisma and other tools in the ecosystem?
Yeah, so for any tool that wants to integrate with Supabase, then yes, it's basically the question is, does any tool integrate with Postgres? Because as soon as you can integrate with Postgres, then it works with ours. All you need to do is update the schema, and we'll try work as natively as possible with the Postgres database. We don't do anything fancy on top. There are a couple of things that we do for our auth. For example, we put an auth schema inside it, and we try to keep your database clean by adding an extension schema where you install your extensions. But otherwise, it's really just a native Postgres database. You could literally dump your Postgres database today and restore it inside Supabase, and it will sort of just work, is the idea.
Okay, that's excellent. I had an application that I worked in. It's an internal app at GitHub, mainly for only employees. So no details is needed about it. But the point is that we decided to sunset it because we ended up moving on to support it in different ways.
Okay.
So I actually exported the database and had nowhere to put it. It was basically a Rails app. the project basically died. So like there's no real need to migrate it to Supabase or anything else like that. But it was my first time ever even trying to attempt to migrate a Postgres database, which to me was like very interesting, but also slightly scary.
Yep.
So it sounds like if I choose a tool like Supabase, I can get a lot of those features for free, just sort of pointing my database to it.
Yes. Well, that's the thing. I mean, the very long-term future of Supabase is that we know that databases are sort of this unsolved problem for a lot of engineers. I mean, people know about migrations, but they don't know what's the canonical best way to do it. People might be trying to migrate large databases, maybe trying to fork. How do you do it with preview deploys? How do you manage the database with lots of different users, developers developing on top of it? So we basically want to solve all these lower level problems that, people just don't have to think about at this stage or don't want to think about. And we'll solve them for people who aren't so experienced with databases in particular. So if you're a front-end engineer, then we should bring the easiness of front-end to Postgres itself.
Yeah, and that's what I love about the JAMstack is I don't have to be an expert at specific layers of the stack. Like I can get real deep on whatever I want to. But as you mentioned, database is something that I just did not spend a lot of time to. Like my background, I mentioned Rails is where all my Postgres experience comes from. So I have active records, which is why my question was geared towards Prisma, which provides me that layer of abstraction that I don't have to worry about. And then all the Rails gems and extensions that exist, I'm just sort of this trusting the Rails community to help me along the way when it comes to database interactions. But it sounds like folks who maybe are shy on touching this part of the stack, the back end of the database portion of it, they can actually approach Supabase with confidence and even maybe learn something coming out of it, it sounds like.
Definitely. And we kind of want to give this, I guess you could say, like a Rails-like experience where it's we start you off giving you best practices, but you can get off the Rails very easily. I mean, you've already got Postgres level access to your database, so you can hook in directly and you can start doing whatever you would do with a normal Postgres database. So that's the goal.
Yeah, and you said the serverless aspect of it. So when you said you could take it and host it elsewhere, are you saying that I can host my database in like AWS and whatever their hosting provider is? I don't know if it's, I think serverless like Lambda, but I'm not sure if there's another thing I'm missing.
No, so the serverless aspect is that essentially we are your server, we are your database provider.
Okay.
Yep.
Got it.
But to touch on another underlying question, and probably one that most people are thinking about, do we work with existing databases? So would you connect us to, say, an RDS instance or an Aurora instance? At this stage, it's no, because we're still in beta and we're just focused on building on top of our own Postgres offering, which is literally just Postgres with some extensions installed and all the right permissions for replication. So yeah, at this stage, we are a hosted service, but at some stage, we will actually give the ability to, bring your own database and we'll just connect in. You get the interface, you get the APIs, and we'll connect in and give you everything. The reason why we don't at this stage is because it's easier to build on something that we fully control, especially the real-time aspect. So our real-time engine actually uses the Postgres replication stream to detect changes to tables. And a lot of the providers actually don't give the right level of access for replication that we need. So we'd have to turn that off for most people. And it's just a bit harder to support. So once we've built out a good feature set, then we'll start working on how we can turn things on and off for different providers.
And I'm curious about you mentioned the replication and the real-time aspect of it. Are you leveraging open source tools to power this? Are there familiar names that people are familiar? Like I might not be familiar with them, but maybe someone listening is.
Yeah, so we basically are an amalgamation of 6 tools right now, Supabase. So yeah, it's a bit complicated. Obviously on the bottom, if I go bottom up, you've got PostgreSQL, the database. Then coming up a layer for the APIs is Postgres, which is the automatic APIs that I was talking about.
Yep.
Then for the real-time aspect, we've actually built a real-time Elixir engine ourselves. This is the one that we open sourced at the start. It's called Real-Time, Supabase Real-Time. And that is the one that decodes the logical stream and blasts it out over WebSockets so you can connect to it from a client or a browser. Then we use Netlify GoTrue for auth. And then finally, we use an API gateway called Kong, which is great. And we plan to provide some support around turning on and off plugins in the dashboard for the API level.
Yeah, I'm familiar with Kong actually, and familiar with actually all the things you named. So I'm impressed with myself,
Cool. Yeah.
to be quite honest. But yeah, that's interesting. And then I'm curious the future of Supabase and the roadmap, but also one thing that comes to mind too as well is like PostgreSQL, which is GraphQL on top of Postgres. It's a tool I've always wanted to leverage, but I've never really had a database that's been in Postgres long enough to even attempt to do something like that. So if I wanted to bring in like an extension that you aren't already supporting, can I leverage that natively without exporting my Supabase somewhere else?
Yeah, so Graphql is pretty cool actually. For those listening, Graphql is basically like Postgres, and it automatically detects your schema. And it builds an automatic GraphQL engine on top of your Postgres schema. So it's sort of like the GraphQL version of Postgres. We ourselves don't plan to offer it, but if you wanted to, you could just connect it into our database. Since we give you Postgres level access, you just need to install it, point it at your Supabase database, and you've got Graphql up and running. So it's very cool. And the reason why we won't support it at this stage is because Postgres itself actually offers sort of nested queries. You can query into foreign relationships automatically.
Yeah.
And we provide libraries that make it very simple to do this. There's a lot of overlap at this stage, and we don't see the need for offering both.
Yeah. And when you say Postgres level access, is that me actually typing PSQL in my terminal, pointing it to my Postgres database that's hosted with Supabase and adding extensions that way?
Correct. Yep.
Okay.
And this is part of the thing where you can get off the rails, right?
Yeah,
So people routinely break their database with us, but we don't care. I mean, we want to give you full access. You shouldn't think of this as just a toy. This is something that you can use. You can debug yourself. You can literally, we give you a SQL editor inside the dashboard itself, so you can get down to SQL level and query. You can connect in with your favorite tool. I use dbeaver or Table Plus, whatever you want to use. You can actually start interfacing with your database using whatever tools you're familiar with.
Wow, I'm impressed, and I'm looking forward to getting more confidence. And yeah, and it's funny you bring it up. This is not a toy, and I appreciate you bringing that up too as well. Because like when I approach this, like I want to build a toy app, but also if the app takes off or people actually leverage it, I do want to take it seriously eventually. And that's just how I've approached my career. Is I'd sort of play around with things and see if they stick, and then I'll run with it if people actually want to pay me money for it. Which sadly no one's done that yet. So hopefully this is the year.
Perfect. Yeah. Well, I hope for the success of your app. But yeah, that's really what we're trying to make sure that we provide. If anyone does have a successful app that they've sort of built over the weekend as just a prototype, they get hit with Hack News. Actually, there was one 2 days ago that sort of showed up on the front page of Hack News. It was just a show Hack News called paint.wtf, where you can sort of paint a picture and then it would have an AI analyze whether the picture was correct. It would give these absurd things like draw an upside down dinosaur, and then the AI would analyze the effectiveness of your drawing, and then it would rank you globally. And someone had built this using Supabase, and then they got onto the front page of Hack News, and I think they were getting around 2 queries per second, averaged over 6 hours, but peaking at around 2,000 queries per minute, something like that. So it's one of these ones where, if you built it with something that is a toy, you built it on top of, I don't want to name any other tools, but something that can't handle these sort of scales or more, your app goes down and you've lost all that traffic.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that is unfortunate. And I think this kind of the hard way most people sort of figure out how to solve scaling issues is by getting on the front page of Hacker News.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. In fact, that was our first real test. When we were in alpha, we've been building for 3 months, and we got onto the front page of Hacker News. I think we stayed there for about 2 days, and everything was blowing up. But the main thing that was blowing up was our cloud limits. The actual stack that we were using survived fine. And at that stage, because we only had, I think, 50 users, but it was sort of an open alpha where you could sign up, and then we had only 50 people. We were hosting everything on just a Docker Compose up on a literally just SSH into a server, Docker Compose up, and then it would have the 6 tools running on this machine. But for those 2 days, it handled all the traffic just using that stack and Docker Compose. So we know it's good, scalable, even when you're sort of misusing it. So yeah, we're working on making sure that we can scale even beyond to very scalable circumstances.
Yeah, that's that's amazing. And speaking of scale, I'm curious. I do want to talk about the future of Supabase, what you have planned for the rest of the year, but also curious about pricing too as well. So, like one thing that I'm scared of when I do touch databases or touch part of the stack that I know once I get more than 10 users or whatever it is, I'll have to start paying money, which is part of the reason why I haven't built this thing I mentioned, which is the sort of recommendation engine
Yep.
for open source,
Yep.
is because I already have 200 users on my main project. So 200 users on a Heroku Postgres is automatically already going to be paying money right out the gate on a side project. So that's one thing that I'm concerned. So I'm curious, what do you have in store for pricing? And then what do you have in store for the future of this year and the roadmap for Supabase?
Yeah, so pricing, for those listening, we're currently free. We'll bring out pricing very soon. Still working out the details, but it's likely that there'll be sort of two tiers, one extremely low price, but with sort of a very generous time period for free apps. I think a year we'll give free if you're just dabbling. If you sign up while we're in beta, you'll get a year of usage. And then it'll be a very low price. I won't put a number out because we haven't finalized the price.
Yeah, that's fair.
And then sort of a medium tier where you go up in size. But the key is that, we know a lot of people get bill shock with Firebase where you're priced on the number of API calls. What we'll probably do is just some soft limits around how much space you're using in your database rather than the number of queries for non-enterprise customers. So it'll be something like 2 gig of storage for the base tier, and then it'll go up to 10 gig for the next tier, but they're soft limits. So if you blow over them accidentally, then it doesn't matter. We'll just reach out to you to move up into the next tier. So we should be mitigating while we're in beta any concerns around bill shock. It'll be very cheap and competitive with Firebase.
Excellent.
For features, actually, it's quite exciting this year. We've just started planning out what we can release. And of course, Firebase has a lot of features that we need to build. At the moment, we've got sort of the data store and the APIs and the client libraries, but they also have the big two are storage and functions, cloud functions. These are the ones that people are most readily asking for. So this year in Q1, we're going to do actually something called Launch Week at the end of Q1, where we basically launch one thing every day. And the key headline I can tell you right now is going to be storage. We're in the process of building storage now. So look out for that. And then we'll launch something else each and every day for that week.
Okay, excellent. I'm looking forward to that. I will be marking my calendar. And folks, definitely follow Copple. You are Kiwi Copple on Twitter.
Yep.
And Supabase, I believe you have. Do you have Supabase on Twitter as well?
Yeah, we do. Supabase_IO.
Okay, excellent. Perfect. Yeah. Anything else that maybe we didn't cover that you want to mention?
No, I think that's been, pretty good. Thanks a lot for all the questions.
Yeah. And speaking of questions, we're going to actually move out of questions and into picks. These are jam picks, things that you're jamming on. It could be food, music, movie related. I definitely appreciate the conversation we had about Supabase. I'm actually super excited to actually work on this project that I've been talking about. I've actually been talking about this project for too long. So definitely, folks, follow me everywhere on the internet so I can talk about this. But if you don't mind, I'll go first with my picks. My first pick is Instagram, which is kind of it's a weird pick. I just kind of sucked a lot of time in Instagram in the last couple of weeks for whatever reason. The news has been really weird in the last couple months. So I just kind of been sucking my time into just scrolling through Instagram because people seem to be happy and I just want to see something happy.
So what are you doing? Because you're in lockdown, right? You're posting a bunch of pictures. What sort of stuff? What's your thing on Instagram?
Yeah. So I used to use Instagram whenever I traveled. So I used to do a lot of traveling. I was actually supposed to be in Singapore earlier of last year.
Yeah.
And usually just take pictures and do photos and food. But 2020, I just kind of stopped doing that because taking photos and pictures of food of like my local coffee shop is just not as interesting to me. I wanted to show, which I probably, in hindsight, I probably still could have did that. Same coffee every day because my coffee shop has been open the entire time. They just happen to have a nice walk-up window, which has been COVID friendly.
Cool.
But that's besides the fact. Now I'm really into food, still into food. I've been making a lot of food. I'm getting a lot of recipes on Instagram. I know this has been a thing that's been on Facebook, but I haven't used Facebook regularly for years. So I think a lot of people, Facebook has figured Instagram been their sort of loss leader and they've been basically gaining adoption through Instagram, but losing adoption through Facebook. We don't have to go back and forth on that. People, you can mention me somewhere else. But what I'm getting at is actually I have a lot of furniture I look at on Instagram. I watch a lot of reels of people dancing for some reason. Nice. A lot of TikToks on Instagram.
Okay.
But yeah, and then a shout out to Korean Dad. Korean Dad is actually, he's based in San Francisco. He's actually the owner of the coffee shop that was inside of GitHub when we had the office open. But that guy blew up on TikTok.
Yeah.
And he's also blew up on Instagram and Twitter. And I've just been following him because this guy's hilarious. And he's just basically a Korean dad that is just super nice, super positive, has nothing negative to say. And I love his persona. I hope that's his real persona. I hope he's like super nice in real life as well.
Yeah.
Because I have not met him before in real life. I just knew of him. Yeah. So check out Korean Dad. Leverage Instagram if you're cool with that. I know some people have a weird security limitations in what they can use or what they want to use. Yeah. So definitely use at your own.
At your own peril.
Yes, at your own peril.
And what's your Instagram handle so everyone can find you?
I'm bdougio. Yeah, it's the same as Twitter.
Okay.
It's just funny is I never promoted my Instagram ever because it's just for me. It's a public Instagram, but I just always just did my own stories. And if you knew I was there, you would follow me. So I only have like 200 people who follow me. So hit me up on Instagram. I'm going to start doing some food related stories and pictures because, I'm at home, which is one last pick, which I'll mention, which is Joshua Weissman, who's a YouTuber. He used to be a professional chef in Austin, Texas.
Oh, cool.
And he's been doing these things where during quarantine, he'll find like a fast food restaurant or a popular item like at Popeyes or whatever, and he'll make it from scratch at home. So he did Cinnabon, which I don't know if they had Cinnabon down in Asia. But if you know the cinnamon rolls, I know they're probably called something else out there, but cinnamon rolls, Cinnabon, they're super bad for you. You get them at the mall. It's like a quintessential American treat. And he made one of those and like shared the recipe. And over the holidays, I made the same thing, used the same, everything that he did.
Nice.
And they were amazing. I had Cinnabon cinnamon rolls at home Christmas morning for the entire family, which, just brushed a little off my shoulder because, I thought it was pretty good. But yeah, he's a whiz and he just breaks everything down for you and makes it approachable for you to do.
Yeah. Okay. Very cool. And it's cool that you mentioned sort of the positive aspects of social media. I actually, I have most of the tools, but I actually don't use any of them. They make it very hard to code if I spend too much time on social media. But, you hear a lot of negative stuff about social media. It's always nice to hear people talking about the positive aspects that, you can find. And I think if you cultivate it, spend some time cultivating the right audience, the very positive people, then it can be a great thing.
I am not afraid to unfollow people. You can be my wife, sister, brother, mother.
Yeah.
I'm cool to unfollow you if you're not giving me the content I want.
Okay, cool. So be positive or bdougio will unfollow you. That's great.
Yeah.
Nice.
Excellent. Did you have any picks for the audience that you wanted to share?
Yeah, I mean, your life sounds far more interesting than mine because I think I'm consumed by work. The only thing I can think at this stage is that we've got a cool tool. Maybe it's relevant for a lot of the open source people. We've got a tool called repository.surf. If you go there, you can actually look up an open source organization. For example, you could go to repository.surf/Supabase or /Vercel, and you can see their star growth over time, but also you can claim an organization. And then when you claim your organization, you can start seeing how many issues are open and sort of the burn down of issues or the burn up of issues in our case and how we're growing, these sort of things. So this is one that we sort of have been dogfooding internally. It's been quite fun just building something unrelated to what we're building, but still useful. And it's been quite cool, actually, sort of surfing around different organizations, seeing how they're growing, seeing the bumps, why the bumps come, and what they're doing.
Yeah, that's really cool. There's a tool that you might have heard of, Algolia. They're within the JAMstack. They every year did a thing where it was they would give something away for free to the open source community. So they built the search for Hacker News, which is something that Hacker News searches is not the best.
Yep.
So they built a better version of it where they index the entire Hacker News site, and you can go back and look at historical Hacker News articles.
Nice.
And it does a couple other things. So y'all should consider shipping that for the world to benefit from. I guess it's public.
It's public, but also it's open source. So if anyone wants to improve it, we thought about putting in some community features where you can see, who are the top contributors and sort of profile them, or maybe highlight the maintainers. So, you can surf around. But to be honest, we're super busy. So if anyone wants to contribute, it is open source. Just go to Supabase on GitHub, find the repository.surf, or go to the website and click on the GitHub link down the bottom.
Excellent.
But that's the one we've been jamming on. It's been a lot of fun. We actually do sort of dog fooding a lot of tools, but that's the most interesting one that I can think of at the moment.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, actually, that's how open source got developed, is because I was dog fooding Netlify.
Nice.
And a lot of their newer features. So I built that little tool while I was working there, and it's like my little pet project. But I'm interested to see if there's any room for contributions on my end, or maybe replacing my Instagram scrolling, and I can start scrolling through some repositories.
That'd be great. Yeah, we'd love to get you in there contributing. That'd be awesome.
Excellent. Yeah, looking forward to it. And thanks for the conversation. Folks, I hope you got a lot of insight out of Copple's story, as well as what Supabase is offering for the community. Definitely try it out. And listeners, keep spreading the jam. That's all the time we have for today. If you're interested in being a guest on the show, or if you'd like to suggest a topic, find us on Twitter at JAMstack Radio. To learn more about Heavybit, visit heavybit.com. And while you're there, check out their library. It's packed with amazing talks on sales, marketing, product, and general management from founders of developer tools companies and other industry leaders.